The Calaxian fleet hung in space like a constellation of death, their crystalline hulls catching starlight and throwing it back in sharp, predatory gleams. 300 warships arranged in perfect formation around Earth's primary orbital defense station, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their message was clear: surrender or burn. Captain Jake Miller stood at the observation deck of Station Alpha, watching the alien armada through reinforced transparisteel. His weathered hands gripped the railing as he counted the enemy vessels. For the 100th time, the math hadn't changed. 300 to 1. The Calaxians hadn't come to negotiate, they'd come to collect. "Captain," his communications officer called from across the bridge, "the alien commander is requesting another channel." Miller turned from the window, his gray eyes reflecting the cold light of distant stars. "Put him through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Admiral Vex. The Calaxian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with each heartbeat. 4 arms extended from his torso, each ending in razor-sharp claws that could tear through steel. His compound eyes, multifaceted like black diamonds, fixed on Miller with predatory intelligence. "Human," Vex's voice resonated through the translator, each word dripping with disdain. "Your 24 hours are nearly expired. Have you prepared the surrender documents?" Miller kept his expression neutral. Around him, his crew of 43 men and women worked at their stations, maintaining the facade of normal operations. They all knew that Truth Station Alpha was humanity's last stand, the final barrier between Earth and annihilation. The planet's surface defenses had been systematically destroyed over the past week. The orbital platforms were slag. Even the mighty Luna base had gone silent. "I have," Miller replied, his voice steady. "But such momentous decisions require proper ceremony. Perhaps you'd honor us by coming aboard to accept our surrender in person." Vex's mandibles clicked, the Calaxian equivalent of laughter. "You think to trap me, little human? My species has conquered 47 worlds. We have fought battles in the void between stars and emerged victorious. Your primitive station poses no threat." "Of course not," Miller agreed. "But surely the formal surrender of an entire species deserves the personal attention of so distinguished a commander. The chronicles of your victory should record that Admiral Vex himself accepted humanity's submission." The alien's bioluminescent patterns brightened with what Miller had learned to recognize as pride. Calaxians were warriors, but they were also creatures of protocol and honor. The idea of a formal surrender ceremony appealed to Vex's sense of propriety. "Very well," Vex decided. "I will bring 10 of my finest warriors. You will have the documents ready and all weapons powered down. Any deception will result in the immediate glassing of your world." "Understood, Admiral. Docking Bay 7 will be cleared for your arrival." The transmission ended, leaving Miller alone with his thoughts and the weight of impossible odds. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe, it's free, and it helps us bring these front lines to you. Behind him, his crew continued their work, but Miller could feel their eyes on him. They knew this wasn't surrender, it was something far more dangerous. In the 6 months since first contact, humanity had learned that the Calaxians were physically superior in every way. Stronger, faster, more resilient. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. They had never lost a war, but they had never fought humans before. Miller activated his command console and began inputting a series of codes. Deep in the station's core, systems that had been dormant for years began to hum to life. Station Alpha had been built during the paranoid days of the Cold War, when humanity's greatest fear was nuclear annihilation. Its designers had incorporated features that no alien species would think to look for, because no alien species had ever been quite as creatively paranoid as humans. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "are you sure about this?" Miller looked at the young woman, barely out of the academy, her face pale with fear and determination. "They expect us to roll over because they're stronger. But strength isn't everything. Sometimes you just need to be willing to do what the other guy won't." The countdown timer on his console showed 18 minutes until Vex's arrival. 18 minutes to prepare for the impossible killing a Calaxian Admiral. With nothing but human ingenuity and the element of surprise outside, the alien fleet waited in perfect formation, confident in their superiority. They had no idea they were about to learn why humanity had clawed its way to the top of Earth's food chain. Admiral Vex's shuttle docked with Station Alpha exactly on schedule, its sleek form sliding into the docking bay like a blade entering flesh. Miller watched from the observation gallery as the alien craft powered down, its hull still glowing with residual heat from the void. Through the transparisteel, he could see the Calaxian warriors preparing to disembark 10 of their finest, just as Vex had promised. All weapons powered down as requested, Miller announced over the COM system. Artificial gravity in Docking Bay 7 reduced to Earth normal for your comfort. It was a lie wrapped in courtesy. The gravity hadn't been reduced, it had been carefully calibrated. Station Alpha's rotating sections created artificial gravity through centrifugal force, but the central hub remained in 0G. Miller had spent the last 18 minutes rerouting power and adjusting the station's rotation to create a very specific environment in the meeting chamber. The airlock cycled, and Admiral Vex emerged in his full battle regalia. The Calaxians. Exoskeleton gleamed with embedded armor plating, and his forearms carried weapons that could level city blocks. Behind him, his warriors moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, their compound eyes scanning for threats. "Welcome aboard Station Alpha," Miller said, greeting them in the docking bay's antechamber. He wore his dress uniform, complete with ceremonial sword, a touch that seemed to amuse the aliens. "If you'll follow me, I've prepared a formal chamber for the surrender ceremony." Vex's mandibles clicked approvingly. "You show proper respect for the gravity of this moment, human. Your species may be primitive, but you understand protocol." They moved through the station's corridors, past bulkheads that had been designed to withstand direct nuclear strikes. Miller had memorized every pipe, every junction, every emergency system. The Calaxians saw only sterile metal walls and standard human architecture. They missed the subtle modifications he'd made, the loosened panels, the rerouted atmospheric controls, the carefully placed maintenance equipment. "Your station is larger than it appears from outside," Vex observed as they walked. "These corridors seem to extend far beyond the visible structure." "Human engineering," Miller replied. "We tend to build things to last." The meeting chamber was located in the station's central hub, accessed through a series of airlocks that most visitors assumed were for atmospheric pressure regulation. In reality, they were transition zones between the rotating sections and the zero-gravity core. Miller had chosen this location carefully. It was the one place on the station where his human physiology might give him an advantage. "Impressive," Vex said as they entered the chamber. The room was spherical, its walls lined with monitors displaying Earth's blue marble against the starfield. A single table floated in the center, held in place by magnetic anchors. "Your species has an eye for dramatic presentation." "We try," Miller said, gesturing to the floating chairs arranged around the table. "Please, make yourselves comfortable while I retrieve the surrender documents." As the Calaxians settled into their positions, Miller activated a hidden control panel. Throughout the station, systems began to respond to his commands. The atmospheric processors shifted from standard mix to something more exotic. The artificial gravity generators in the chamber began to fluctuate in carefully timed patterns. Emergency lighting systems prepared to strobe at frequencies that would disorient alien nervous systems. Miller returned to the table carrying a simple briefcase. Inside were the surrender documents, real enough to pass casual inspection, but meaningless. The true weapon was the chamber itself, transformed into a carefully orchestrated death trap. "Before we proceed," Miller said, taking his seat across from Vex, "I should warn you that this chamber can be unpredictable. The gravity generators sometimes malfunction." As if on cue, the artificial gravity flickered. The Calaxians shifted uncomfortably as their inner ears struggled to compensate. Unlike humans, who had evolved to handle the three-dimensional environment of trees and cliffs, the Calaxians had evolved on a high-gravity world with stable ground. Zero G was there, Weakness. No matter, Vex said, though his bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a more cautious hue. Proceed with the ceremony. Miller opened the briefcase and withdrew the documents. As he did, his hand brushed against a hidden switch. Throughout the chamber, emergency systems activated. The lights began to strobe in patterns designed to trigger vertigo in compound eyes. The atmospheric mix shifted to include trace amounts of gases that would cloud alien judgment. The gravity generators began to pulse in rhythm with the Calaxian heartbeat, creating a disorienting resonance. These documents, Miller said, his voice steady despite the chaos beginning to unfold around them, represent the formal surrender of Earth's military forces to the Calaxian Empire. The aliens were starting to show signs of distress. Their compound eyes, so effective in normal light, struggled with the strobing patterns. Their inner ears, designed for stable gravity, sent conflicting signals as the chamber's artificial gravity field pulsed and shifted. "Something is wrong," one of the warriors said, his translation device struggling with the alien's increasingly slurred speech. "Indeed," Miller agreed, and his hand moved to the ceremonial sword at his side. "Something is very wrong." The blade emerged from its sheath with a whisper of steel on leather. In the fluctuating gravity, it moved like a living thing, its weight shifting unpredictably. The Calaxians reached for their weapons, but their coordination was shot. The chamber had become a three-dimensional maze of disorientation and confusion. Miller had trained for this moment, not in any academy, but in the hard school of human desperation. He pushed off from the table, using the zero-gravity environment to his advantage, and prepared to do what no alien species expected: fight dirty. The first Calaxian warrior died before he could clear his weapon from its holster. Miller's blade found the gap between exoskeleton plates, sliding between the alien's second and third ribs with surgical precision. In the fluctuating gravity, the warrior's body spun away, bright blue blood forming perfect spheres in the zero-G environment. "Treachery!" Vex roared, his forearms reaching for weapons that seemed to weigh nothing one moment and tons the next. The carefully orchestrated chaos of the chamber had turned the apex predators into confused, stumbling giants. Miller had prepared for this moment by studying every piece of Calaxian physiology data they'd gathered during the brief diplomatic period. He knew their weaknesses: the soft joints where their exoskeleton segments met, the vulnerable nerve clusters beneath their armor, the way their compound eyes processed light and motion. Most importantly, he knew they had never fought a species that had evolved in 3 dimensions. A second warrior lunged at him, claws extended. Miller grabbed a loose ceiling panel, one of many he'd strategically loosened, and used it as a shield. The alien's claws punched through the metal, but the impact sent both combatants spinning in different directions. Miller used the momentum to drive his sword into the warrior's neck, severing the main nerve cluster. "Impossible," Vex hissed, his bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid, angry sequences. "You are inferior beings." "Maybe," Miller agreed, dodging another attack by pushing off the chamber wall. "But we're creative, inferior beings." The atmospheric processors had been pumping a carefully mixed cocktail of gases into the chamber, nothing immediately lethal, but enough to cloud alien reflexes while leaving Miller's human physiology largely unaffected. The strobing lights continued their assault on Calaxian visual systems, while the gravity generators created a constantly shifting environment that favored the human, who had grown up climbing trees and swimming in 3-dimensional space. A third warrior tried to corner Miller against the chamber wall, but the human had anticipated this. He activated another hidden control, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing a maintenance tunnel. Miller disappeared into the narrow space, his smaller human frame allowing him to navigate passages that would challenge the larger aliens. "Coward!" Vex bellowed, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The Calaxians had conquered 47 worlds, but they had never faced an enemy who turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. Miller emerged from a different tunnel, behind the group of warriors. His blade found another gap in alien armor, this time between the shoulder plates of a warrior who was still trying to orient himself in the shifting gravity. The alien's weapon, a plasma rifle that could melt tank armor, spun away harmlessly as its wielder died. "You see," Miller said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's comm system. "The thing about humans is that we're not just tool users, we're environment manipulators. We don't just adapt to our surroundings, we change them to suit our needs." Admiral Vex had finally managed to draw his primary weapon, a massive energy cannon that required all 4 arms to operate. But in the zero-gravity environment, Newton's laws became his enemy. As he fired, the recoil sent him spinning backward, his shots going wide and scorching the chamber walls. Miller used the distraction to eliminate 2 more warriors, his blade work precise and economical. Each strike targeted critical nerve clusters, or joint weaknesses. The alien's superior strength and armor meant nothing when the human could strike at precisely the right spot with surgical accuracy. "How?" Vex demanded, his weapon's energy cells depleted and his remaining warriors dead or dying around him. "How are you doing this?" "Experience," Miller replied, closing the distance between them. "You see, Admiral, your species has been apex predators for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to be prey. But humans, we were prey for millions of years. We learned to be clever, to be tricky, to turn every disadvantage into an advantage." Vex's 4 arms came up in a desperate guard, but Miller had already anticipated the movement. The ceremonial sword, sharpened to a molecular edge in the station's maintenance shop, slid between the alien's primary and secondary hearts. Vex's bioluminescent patterns flared once, then began to fade. "Your fleet," Vex gasped, his compound eyes growing dim. "They will glass your world." "Maybe," Miller admitted, withdrawing his blade. "But they'll have to explain to the Calaxian High Command how they let their admiral get killed by a primitive human. That should be an interesting conversation." "Admiral." Vex's body went limp, floating in the zero-gravity environment like a monument to alien arrogance. Miller activated the chamber's gravity generators, returning the room to normal Earth gravity. The alien corpses hit the floor with wet, final sounds. Miller cleaned his blade on a piece of alien armor, then sheathed it. He had work to do. The hard part was over. Now came the real challenge. He had to convince 300 starships that humanity was not prey, but predator. He activated the chamber's communication system and opened a channel to the Calaxian fleet. "This is Captain Jake Miller of Station Alpha. I believe we need to renegotiate our terms." The response was immediate and furious, but Miller was already moving. He had a presentation to prepare, and he needed Admiral Vex's head as a visual aid. The Calaxians were about to learn that humans didn't just think outside the box. They burned the box down and built something better from the ashes. The Calaxian delegation arrived exactly 2 hours after Miller's transmission, their shuttle docking with Station Alpha under the guns of their own fleet. Vice Admiral Kren led the group, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with barely contained rage. Behind her came 5 senior officers, each one a veteran of multiple conquest campaigns. "Where is Admiral Vex?" Kren demanded as soon as the airlock cycled open. Her compound eyes scanned the docking bay, searching for threats. "And why do you dare to request new terms when you have already surrendered?" Miller stood waiting for them, still in his dress uniform, but now wearing the sidearm openly. "Admiral Vex is indisposed. As for the terms, well, let's just say circumstances have changed. If you'll follow me to the conference room, I'll explain everything." The conference room was on the station's primary level, in normal gravity with standard lighting. Miller had chosen it specifically to avoid any suggestion of trickery. What he was about to do would work best in a completely normal environment, where the shock would be pure and undiluted. The room was dominated by a long table made of polished metal, its surface reflecting the overhead lights. Miller had arranged chairs for the Calaxian delegation, with his own seat at the head of the table. A simple briefcase sat beside his chair, ordinary and unremarkable. "Please, take your seats," Miller said, gesturing to the chairs. "Before we begin our negotiations, I want to show you something that I think will clarify the situation." Vice Admiral Kren's patterns shifted to suspicious yellow. "What kind of demonstration?" "A simple one," Miller replied. He opened the briefcase with deliberate care, reached inside, and withdrew Admiral Vex's severed head. The silence that followed was absolute. Miller placed the head on the table with a wet thud that echoed through the chamber. Vex's compound. Eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his mandibles frozen in a final expression of shock and disbelief. "I believe this belongs to you," Miller said calmly, taking his seat. "Admiral Vex was kind enough to visit my station earlier. Unfortunately, he won't be returning to his fleet." The Calaxian officers recoiled as if the head were radioactive. Their bioluminescent patterns flared through rapid sequences of colors: shock, disbelief, terror, and finally rage. One of the junior officers reached for his weapon, but Kren's gesture stopped him. "Impossible," she whispered. "You are primitives. You have no weapons that could kill a Calaxian admiral." Miller finished. "You're right. We don't have weapons. That could do it, but we have something better: necessity. And unlike your species, we've never forgotten what it feels like to be hunted." He leaned forward, his gray eyes reflecting the overhead lights. "You see, Vice Admiral, your empire has made a fundamental error in judgment. You've confused technological superiority with evolutionary superiority. But evolution isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the most adaptable." Kren's patterns had shifted to deep purple, the Calaxian equivalent of barely controlled fury. "You murdered our admiral through treachery and deception." "I did," Miller agreed without hesitation, "and I'd do it again. Because that's what humans do when we're backed into a corner. We fight dirty, we fight smart, and we fight to win. Your Admiral expected a primitive species to roll over and die. Instead, he learned that humans are the most dangerous predators this galaxy has ever produced." The briefcase held more than just Vex's head. Miller reached in again and withdrew a datapad, sliding it across the table toward Kren. "Those are the new terms. I suggest you read them carefully." Kren picked up the pad with trembling claws, her compound eyes scanning the text. As she read, her bioluminescent patterns shifted through a spectrum of colors that Miller had learned to recognize: surprise, outrage, and finally, a grudging respect. "You cannot be serious," she said. "These terms are ... impossible. The High Command will never accept them." "They will," Miller replied. "Because the alternative is having this conversation repeated across every star system in the galaxy. Your admiral came here expecting to collect tribute from a conquered species. Instead, he became the first Calaxian to die in single combat against a human. That's going to be a very difficult story to spin." The terms were simple and brutal. The Calaxian fleet would withdraw from Earth's system immediately. All conquered human colonies would be returned to human control. Reparations would be paid for the damage inflicted during the invasion. And most importantly, humanity would be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all the rights and protections that entailed. "And if we refuse?" Kren asked. Miller smiled, and for the first time since the aliens had arrived, he looked genuinely pleased. "Then you'll have to explain to the High Command how you let a primitive species kill your admiral and dictate terms to your fleet. More importantly, you'll have to explain what that means for the other 47 worlds you've conquered." The implication was clear. If humans could kill Calaxian admirals, then humans could teach other species to do the same. The empire that had seemed invincible suddenly looked very vulnerable. "You're insane," Kren said, but her patterns had shifted to thoughtful blue. "The risks you're taking are the same risks we've been taking since we first climbed down from the trees," Miller interrupted. "The difference is that now we have the tools to make those risks worthwhile." He stood up, leaving Vex's head on the table as a reminder of what humanity was capable of. "You have 12 hours to consider my terms. After that, I start broadcasting detailed tactical analyses of your admiral's death to every species in the galaxy. I think they'll find it very educational." The Calaxian sat in stunned silence as Miller walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one final time. "Oh, and Vice Admiral? You might want to take that with you when you leave. I'm sure the High Command will want to verify that it's really him." The response came in 11 hours and 57 minutes. Vice Admiral Kren's transmission was brief, formal, and carried the weight of defeat disguised as diplomacy. The Calaxian High Command had accepted the terms, all of them. The fleet would withdraw immediately, the conquered colonies would be returned, and humanity would take its place among the galactic powers. Miller stood in the observation deck of Station Alpha, watching the alien fleet begin its departure. The crystalline hulls that had seemed so threatening just days ago now looked diminished, their formations loose and dispirited. Word of Admiral. Vex's death had spread through the Calaxian ranks like wildfire, and with it came a realization that would reshape the galaxy. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving messages from the other conquered worlds. The Altarians, the Centauri colonies, even the vegan trade unions. They're all asking the same question, which is, how did we do it?" Miller smiled. It was a question he'd been expecting. News of the Calaxian withdrawal had traveled faster than light through the galaxy's communication networks. 47. Conquered worlds suddenly faced a universe where their oppressors could be defeated by a single human with a sword and the will to use it. "Open a general broadcast channel," Miller ordered. "All frequencies, maximum range." The communications array powered up, its signal reaching across light years to touch every inhabited system in the local spiral arm. When Miller spoke, his words would be heard by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. "To all species currently under Calaxian occupation," he began. "This is Captain Jake Miller of the Human Defense Forces. Yesterday, Admiral Vex of the Calaxian Empire came to Earth demanding our surrender. Today, his fleet is retreating to their home worlds in defeat. The difference between those two moments is simple. We refuse to accept that superior technology means superior species." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication requests flooded in from across the galaxy, resistance movements, planetary governments, even individual aliens who had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. "The Calaxians ruled through fear," Miller continued. "They convinced the galaxy that their conquest was inevitable, that their technology made them unstoppable. But technology is just tools, and tools are only as effective as the beings who wield them. The Calaxians forgot that intelligence, creativity, and determination are the most powerful weapons in any arsenal." Station Alpha's scanners were picking up anomalous readings from across the galaxy. Ships were moving, fleets were assembling, and communication networks were buzzing with activity. The carefully maintained order of the Calaxian Empire was beginning to fracture. "We're receiving a priority transmission," the communications officer reported. "It's from the Calaxian High Command," Miller nodded. He'd been expecting this call. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Calaxian unlike any Miller had seen before. This one was ancient, its exoskeleton scarred by centuries of battle, its bioluminescent patterns dim with age. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Human," the ancient Calaxian said. "I am Supreme Commander Terrell of the High Command. We have reviewed your ... demonstration. Your terms are acceptable, but understand that this arrangement extends only to your species. The other worlds remain under our protection." "I'm afraid that's not acceptable," Miller replied. The terms were clear: all conquered worlds will be given the opportunity to choose their own governance. "The age of the Calaxian Empire is over." Terrell's patterns flared with anger. "You dare to dictate terms to the Supreme Commander?" "I dare." "To honor the sacrifice of Admiral Vex," Miller said. "His death proved that the Calaxians are not invincible. That proof belongs to the galaxy, not just to humanity." The transmission cut off, but Miller knew the message had been received. Across the galaxy, the dominated species were already beginning to stir. The Altarians had declared independence within hours of the Calaxian withdrawal from Earth. The Centauri colonies were forming a defense coalition. Even the peaceful vegan trade unions were discussing military options. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting massive fleet movements throughout Calaxian space. They're pulling ships from occupation duty to defend their core worlds." Miller nodded. It was exactly what he'd expected. An empire built on fear and intimidation could only survive as long as that fear remained absolute. Once the illusion of invincibility was shattered, the entire structure would collapse. "Open another channel," he ordered. This time, directed to the Calaxian High Command. When the connection was established, Miller found himself facing Supreme Commander Terrell once again. The ancient alien's patterns were dim, resigned. "What do you want now, human?" To offer you a choice, Miller replied. You can fight a dozen independence wars simultaneously while your empire crumbles around you. Or you can accept the new reality. The galaxy has changed, Supreme Commander. The question is whether you'll change with it or be swept away by it. Terrell's compound eyes studied Miller for a long moment. Finally, the alien's patterns shifted to a color Miller had never seen before. Deep, contemplative silver. What do you propose? A new galactic order, Miller said. Based on cooperation rather than conquest. Trade rather than tribute. Mutual defense rather than oppression. The Calaxians have knowledge and technology that could benefit every species in the galaxy. But not as conquerors, as partners. It took 3 days for the High Command to respond. When they did, their answer would reshape the galaxy forever. The Calaxian Empire would be dissolved, its worlds granted independence or the option to remain in a new confederation. The vast military fleets would be converted to exploration and defense vessels. Most importantly, the Calaxians would share their advanced technology with all species, creating a new era of galactic cooperation. Miller stood in the observation deck, watching the stars that no longer belonged to any empire. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger universe, and the galaxy would never be the same. Captain, his communications officer called out, "We're receiving a message from Earth. They want to know what we should do next." Miller smiled. "Tell them we're coming home. And tell them to start building more ships. The galaxy is a big place, and we've got a lot of exploring to do." The age of human expansion was about to begin, and this time, they wouldn't be expanding as conquerors or subjects. They would be exploring as equals, partners in a grand adventure that would take them to the very edges of known space and beyond. Admiral Vex's death had ended one chapter of galactic history and begun another. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And it had all started with a single human who refused to surrender.